wait a second. Okay, we are going live now. So, hello everyone. We were not live, and I was talking. So, please welcome today my special guest, Thames, principal security researcher at Tripwire, one of the best cybersecurity companies in the world. Today, we're going to talk about what the cybersecurity is, what are the biggest challenges when it comes to cybersecurity, how to defend yourself from cyber attacks, and obviously, while Lane has a massive, like literally massive experience in cybersecurity from the engineering side, I'm going to talk about a little bit about the nitty-gritty details from the business, but also from the kind of application side from someone who is not a professional in the matter, which in this case is me. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lane Thames. Hello, Lane.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine. So, Lane, it is already it is like noon morning your time. Where you're based?
Yes, I'm in the East Coast of the U.S., so it's noon here where I'm at in Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta, Georgia. Okay. So, how is the weather today? It's warm, cold.
Yes.
What is like? This is still like end of the summer, right? So
yes. It's fairly hot here. It's
Georgian summer is Georgian summer tends to be. If I remember, I was there like 5 years ago. It was very humid, very warm.
Yes.
So nothing changed in that matter.
No, humidity is terrible.
Yeah. Okay. So FYI, if you don't know where Georgia in United States is like if you have watched the like Walking Dead or you know where they produce Coca-Cola, this is Atlanta. So this is this is where they're from, and the biggest airport in United States is also in Atlanta. Delta Airlines is also from there. So in case you didn't know, this is a pretty interesting state, I would say, and very, very strong speed limits, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so Lane, could you tell a little bit more about yourself, like what you do, what is your experience when it comes to the topic of our today's conversation?
Yeah, sure. So I have a PhD from Georgia Tech in electrical and computer engineering. So I've been in the business here about over 19 years, kind of at the intersection of IT, cybersecurity, software development. I've been with Tripwire since 2012, and at Tripwire, we focus on security and compliance technologies for customers. I personally work on our IP360 vulnerability assessment and management product, but we also have products that are that work with secure configuration management, helps customers harden what we call harden their systems. And from a configuration perspective, we have log management tools, file integrity monitoring tools, and things of that nature.
Sure.
So what I do on a day-to-day basis is I'm more of a team lead. I have a few software engineers that work with me on our internal tooling for developing the code and detection mechanisms we use for detecting vulnerabilities on endpoints over IP networks. And so, yeah, I do that. I do some public speaking at security conferences from here, at least before COVID. I used to speak 2 or 3 times a year. And work with our marketing in terms of outreach and thought leadership opportunities.
Sure. Like when it comes to the thought leadership, this is not only thought leadership, but also market leadership, because like Tripwire is one of the biggest, right, on the market.
Yes, been around for a long time.
So yeah, so when I was pitching this webinar, I to the audience, I said that there are 2 companies which I recall, and that matters in the cybersecurity. One is Tripwire, and the second is ComSec from Israel. So Tripwire is obviously this is your competitor, but like I honestly recognize 2 companies. So today we're going to talk about Tripwire mostly and what you do there. So Lane, you've mentioned that you're working on the assessment part. So this is how does it work? So this is part of the engineering assessment that you do, as a company, or this is kind of like survey input of the cybersecurity? How does it work?
Okay, so it's a software product, and how it works is we do what's called scanning. So any device that's on an IP network, you can scan it. You can interact with it over that network using networking protocols. We also have the ability to install what we'll call agents, software that can live on an endpoint. When I say an endpoint, I'm talking, a laptop, servers, things of that nature. Basically, any piece of hardware that's running an operating system with software. These agents can gather data from the system, and we can take that data to determine, for example, what type of applications are there, and then we can map that information to known vulnerabilities. In this space, the common vulnerability enumeration, it's called CVE, is a standard that is used to track known vulnerabilities. And when it comes to our customers, like large banks and government agencies and stuff, their goal is to make sure that their systems are patched and remediated from these known vulnerabilities. So it helps to reduce an organization's overall what's called an attack surface.
Okay, so when you're when you're working with the companies and on the software side, so what are the usual vulnerabilities that you see when it comes to the especially industrial organizations? What are the usual aspects?
So a lot of these companies will be working with like largely Microsoft products. And so Microsoft, unfortunately, has a very strong security release process. They have what's called Patch Tuesday, basically the second Tuesday of every month. Microsoft will release updates, patches for vulnerabilities that researchers from around the world have told them about. They'll fix it, and then they'll issue the patches. And then we work with our customers. They within 24 hours of Microsoft releasing their patches, we deliver our what we call content. It's basically all of the code for detecting does a vulnerability exist and reporting back and all that kind of things. We have our product available to detect all of those vulnerabilities from Microsoft within 24 hours. So that is a lot of companies are largely Microsoft based. It's a large percentage of their systems. For example, if we take it to the industrial side of the house, a lot of the current or legacy systems, if you will, were built around Microsoft products. This was before Linux came, the Linux operating system became very popular, and now it's one of the largest distributions of operating systems in the world. But Microsoft still holds the reins inside of the industrial world in terms of the software that's been written for interacting with industrial systems like programmable logic controllers, your HMI systems, human machine interfaces, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
One of the challenges there is that, and we'll probably talk about this later, but when it comes to security for industrial organizations, a lot of the systems that live within the industrial side of an organization, okay, we're talking about, if we talk about a manufacturing organization, we go down to what's called the shop floor, basically where you build all of the things that you build, your widgets. This equipment that is used is very expensive, and it's built to live for decades. And unfortunately, sometimes the software is built to live for decades, but software has a much, much shorter lifespan. So you'll find a lot of companies, going back to Microsoft, that they still even run Windows XP, Windows 98 in some of these shop floor environments, because the software that was developed to run a certain piece of equipment, well, the developer might not, the company that developed software might not even exist any longer. So upgrades and refreshes, software and hardware refreshes can be challenging when it comes to cybersecurity within the industrial world.
So what you're saying is that we have certain like machinery park in the shop floor, and we see that obviously like these are sometimes, and I have seen the manufacturing facilities like that they have machines from like 1960s, even right, 1970s, and obviously so there is like the conflict, if I understand this correctly, right? There is a conflict between the longevity and the fragility, and actually anti-fragility of the machines, right, versus the longevity and actual fragility of the software that is produced, right? So this creates friction in these processes, and that the fact that, for instance, these machines work on XP, etc. This is, but actually, if you consider that from this perspective, so what is the real problem? Because we have all these firewalls, we have all these things that this is in the intranet system, right? So where does the actual challenge come from? Because I understand that if you have a closed environment, you can protect it, right?
Mhm.
So, and then you can have the actual, like the newest, like cloud and like firewall systems that are kind of protecting you from the outside. But why should we care that much about the internal shop floor cybersecurity and problems?
So, say 20 years ago, air gap, these systems were highly air gapped. Okay, meaning they didn't have the capability to connect to our IT based networks. Okay, they didn't communicate over what's called Ethernet, for example. They didn't have Wi-Fi. They didn't have cellular modems. What you're finding now, okay, what you said is right. These systems at that level, and when I use the word level, there's this thing called the Purdue model that kind of shows, it illustrates as a graphical illustration of where systems live in an industrial organization. And at the lower levels of this model, level 0, 1, and 2 is where these systems reside. And traditionally, we want those highly segmented, firewalled, and everything, and no access. And that's okay. But as our IT-based networks, or IP networks, if you will, start becoming more and more ubiquitous, it becomes much harder to ensure an air gap, especially when you're talking about very large organizations, very large enterprises with, countless devices. And we're bringing more of these online. And so what we have going on right now, some people like the word, some people don't, but the common word you hear is this notion of IT OT convergence or integration. OT defines the operational technology, the devices that live on the shop floor, for example. Or you go up to the next level, you've got the equipment, the human machine interfaces, and all of this kind of good stuff. That kind of defines the OT portion of the industrial organization. And then when you get to the top, let's just say now we're going cloud and SaaS, but you got your CRM tools, your ERP tools, and all of this stuff that is used at the top at the business layer of an organization. What people are trying to do, and this is actually the driving force of Industry 4.0, at least in my opinion, is that we're bringing more devices through this entire organization, but especially within the OT area, because data is the new gold, is the new oil. Being able to go in and collect data from all of these systems and processes, and then being able to use that data using big data and artificial intelligence and machine learning gives significant insight into the full stack of operations across the IT OT divide. And herein lies the problem, is that we have organizations that are bringing much more IT connectivity into these weaker systems, and that is really, it's a problem. It's a good problem, but we, as long as we have legacy issues to deal with, it's going to be one of those things that kind of takes time to get out the old and bring in the new.
Okay, so let's assume that I have an old machines in my facility. Let's like, I don't know, 5 or 6 days ago, I was talking into one of the companies in the smithing industry, manufacturing of like steel industry, very popular. Best regards to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, right? We have like, we also have very, very powerful steel industry, maybe not as powerful as United States, but still this sector is pretty strong, the metallurgy in general. And what they're saying is like, we operate on like the furnaces from 1950s. They were created like in the Soviet times. So this is not that we're building the factory from the scratch, right? That we're unbucking it from the box effectively. We're operating in some things that obviously they're renovated. They are like we change things in them, but the whole core of the technology is like from the 1950s or 60s. So let's assume that I have this technology in my facility, and I'm a big facility, right? What can I do to protect these systems?
Well, right now, understanding what you have and where it's at is a key thing. Asset visibility, understanding what machines, what systems you have that are computerized. Okay, what systems can be communicated with. Having the ability to know what you have in terms of a good inventory. You can't. I guess what I'm saying is you can't protect what you don't know you have.
Okay.
So understanding the systems you have on your networks is key. And then that also enables you to ensure that you can properly segment things that need to be segmented. Because if you've got your steel mill, right, this furnace that's been around, it might be interfaced with a bunch of old computers, but it might be interfaced with some new ones. And you have to kind of evaluate that on a piece by piece basis to see, okay, what do I have to firewall off? What has to be kind of isolated? What needs to be air gapped? And then you inventory it and you monitor it and maintain it and make sure it stays that way, because change is happening at a rapid pace all the time nowadays, especially as more people try to bring new technology into these different areas, across the different levels of this Purdue model I was telling you about, across the different levels of the IT and OT environments. That change, not understanding how things change in your environment is actually a bad thing. You need to understand how things are changing.
So kind of like you should start from kind of auditing the machines and their connectivity between them. And is there like a certain methodology for that, or like a framework that you can recommend or something like that?
It's really just vendors that sell these products that do it. There's different vendors out there, but there's not really a framework. It's really just you have to invest in technology to do this.
Okay, so there is no
some of Tripwire's products. Our parent company is a company called Belden, and we have different sub company. Belden has different sub companies, and so we have, for example, part of where Belden specializes is in rugged equipment for OT environments, as well as special devices that you can put inside of your segmented networks that analyzes the traffic that's going across all of these machines, so that it can help you understand, okay, what's here, the asset discovery portion, and then is there anything malicious going on? Is this okay? You've got a normal type of traffic that's flowing, say, between two devices, but then one day you see something weird. You can have a technology that can alert you in terms of these events. And then these technologies come together often in what's called a SIEM, a security incident and event management system, I believe is what that stands for. But it's basically a system that gathers all of the data you're collecting with your various security tools, and you can analyze it. And you have analysts, socket security operations centers, analysts that can analyze that data and act on various alerts and report to those system owners and such. And so it's when you say, is there any framework of technology, it's the whole gamut of technology you have to use nowadays. Defense, layered defense is the only way to go. There is no single product. There is no single framework. You have to, based off of your business needs and what you do as a business, you determine the type of technology you need at your various levels within your organization.
Okay.
So
okay.
Yeah.
So there is, as I thought, there is no like simple answer for that.
There is no
okay.
single answer. There is no solution. In fact, theoretically, there is no solution to the underlying core problem of security. It's what we call in computer science an intractable problem. And that's where layered defense comes in and reigns king here.
Okay. So kind of to switch gear here. So one thing is the assessment, as you see that there's this software product, but you also have mentioned that one thing is engineering side, but also there's like the human factor into it, right? And from my experience and from what I was, because we are also at Stanversity, we are also preparing the cybersecurity course with like cybersecurity for non-technical executives. So kind of and where they can influence, and obviously they can complain on the compliance and human factor side. So what are the usual human factors things that are critical for the cybersecurity from your experience?
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because you can have all of the technology in the world, but humans, we're involved with this technology and we are the weakest link. So one of the key pieces from the human perspective is constant security awareness and training. Your users within your employees and your users in your organization need to know the very basics of things. Even, for example, right now, one of the biggest threats to any organization worldwide, regardless of sector or what you're doing, is phishing. Phishing and ransomware is currently the biggest issue we're dealing with. And phishing requires constant user training, because there's so many different ways that a user can be socially engineered, and then boom, it's all over. Once you gain, once you're able to get access via a valid user, then the game is over, so to speak. Now, there's this new technology, this new trend coming up that's called zero trust. This example I just gave you was the way our current technology works is everyone has this level of trust. And so, like, if you're in your machine, you're logged into your machine, then you have this certain level of trust. But if you get socially engineered and someone can install malware such that they can get into your machine, well, then you as the attacker are trusted too by just because of the system you gave that you have access to. This new idea of zero trust is basically, it's kind of an idea of you put a no trust perimeter around everything. And it'll be interesting to see where that technology goes in the future. That could aid in this this weakness that we have on the human side by significantly reducing the overall trust domain. But that's still to come way down the road. In summary, security training, awareness, understanding phishing, and letting your users understand what social engineering is, and how to see it is critical.
So we have a question from the audience, but let's answer it in the end, okay?
Sure.
Because I just wanted to mention that and not to lose it. So Monica, stay with us. We'll definitely answer this question. But the question I have, and this is phishing, is actually something I can relate to, because on my previous years, I spent like a few years at McKinsey. Obviously, confidentiality, as you know, for this company is critical, right? This is the company that bases its entire reputation on confidentiality, and that this is kind of like a secret Jesuit church order when it comes to the secrecy and of their clients. So obviously we have received like 5 or 6 phishing emails a month at least, or even more. So the awareness programs were pretty important, and this is where I learned about the phishing. But for the broader audience, could you kind of like do the deep dive? I know that it may sound basic to you, but I think this is important to tell a little bit about ransomware and phishing. What are the differences? What it actually is, and then we're going to deep dive a little bit into the the awareness programs and the importance of them. What do you think of it?
Sure. So we'll start off with phishing. Phishing is basically, and there's actually several ways, and there's actually several terms that they use, but basically you have a malicious actor that is communicating with you, a user. Phishing is technically over email. So a user might send you an email, and they craft it, and when they're really good, they can really craft their emails to make it look so legit that it's extremely hard to not understand it's legit. So as an example, a malicious actor might target a given company, and they might go and study, say, the CEO or their CFO, and really understand who this person is, try to understand how they write and talk, and then they'll use various information regarding, say, in this example, the CFO, and then they'll try to target people that say work under the CFO. And it could be, for example, sending an email that makes it look like it came from the CFO, attached with a spreadsheet, and oftentimes it can be, coming to you with a sense of urgency, trying to make you think something's wrong. For example, it could be a partially, I'm your boss, you have to do this now kind of email, so that the target person will be able to act on it because of just how the human psychology, how human psychology works, right? So that is the phishing side, basically communicating with you, communicating with the user, trying to get a user to do some type of action. Oftentimes the action is to download a file or to open a file, and then this is where ransomware comes in. See, ransomware is a piece of malicious software, okay? And it has to be installed on an endpoint somewhere if it's not taking advantage of a known vulnerability, as an example. So the goal with phishing is to dupe the user into installing a piece of software. And then that piece of software, that piece of malware, can then, depending on the type of malware, it could actually be the ransomware itself, or it could be a simple piece of software that is going to start scanning the systems that are close, on the same network as the targeted user. Or it could be reaching out into what we call command and control servers, where they actually then, pull down a particular type of other malware or the ransomware. But the ransomware, as I said, it's software, and it gets installed often via a phishing attack vector targeting a user. Once the ransomware gets installed, what the ransomware does is it goes through and it encrypts portions of the file system. And then the ransom portion of it is where the attacker will contact back to the user once they've been infected and say, you have to pay me so much money, often in Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, and I will give you the key so that you can unlock your files. And so if they can actually target a high-profile user that has very, very important files, then that's where the ransom really plays, because they might need those files to do business. And so sometimes these companies have no choice but to pay the ransomware.
But should we actually pay them?
It is I personally say no. If an organization is following good disaster recovery processes, then hopefully they would be able to recover from this without having to pay. And what I mean by that is constant backups, having your important files constantly backed up, so that you can say, nowadays we live in a world where our technology, we can just blow it away and rebuild it quickly and cheaply. And so that's the best situation. But unfortunately, we're not always completely prepared with those types of processes, and it could be that you have to pay and you take a gamble. There was the Colonial Pipeline hack that happened over here. I'm not sure if it made the news worldwide or whatever, but we had a large pipeline that it was attacked by ransomware. And I don't know the full internal details, but my understanding was that they initially paid the ransomware, but because this was a situation of urgency where they had systems that they could not, they needed to shut systems down for safety purposes. Okay. And during that time of shutting things down is when they were rebuilding the systems that were impacted by the ransomware. And it turns out, from what I understand, is they paid the ransomware, but ended up their, doing their disaster recovery was actually faster than using the ransomware software with the encryption key to unencrypt it. So it ended up being kind of a bad situation. But anyway, that pipeline was shut down for days, and it had caused major disruptions across the country in terms of, fuel shortages and things of that nature.
Whoa, this is some, cyberpunk level situation that we're talking about here. This is just,
this was an organized crime for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely, there was an organized crime group, and I believe that a government agency was able to help the company recover some of the ransomware. But yeah, it was an interesting situation.
It's tough. So this is actually, this sounds super hypothetical. Let's call it this way, right? For the situations we in Poland, the biggest breach we had recently was the CD Projekt studio creating video games, and they were actually creating the game called Cyberpunk, and it is like kind of where you creating a game about hackers and all these things, and you're actually hacked. But they followed a very good disaster recovery protocol, and they were, what I was told by the community, they actually behave in a good way. So they did say that, yes, we had a breach. Yes, this is what happened. Yes, things happen. So we were working on them. So this is what they did. So kind of Lane, just to the switch gears. So, and then coming back to the awareness. So you're saying that there's phishing, which very often leads to ransomware, etc. So are there any awareness, like kind of so we want to, let's say this, we want to increase the awareness in our company, right? So how should we properly organize it? Who is responsible for that? How should we, properly, tackle this issue, right? Because we know that majority of the problems comes from the very bad awareness, right? And this is the human factor. And this is also probably the most exciting one for non-technical people, right?
Right.
So we want to increase awareness in our organization. And how can we do it? Because I'm talking to the managers when we're discussing the studies and saying, oh, I don't receive such emails. I never received such emails. Until one day they probably receive, right? So what should we do as in an organization, and how can we approach this issue?
So one, this is where there are companies out there that provide training. And for example, when it comes to phishing in particular, some of these companies have simulation programs where they send emails that look like phishing. And what happens is it's a continuous thing where you are sending they're phishing emails, but they're simulated by, the training software. And you can gather statistics on, okay, who's clicking the links, who is not reporting it back to the InfoSec department. And that can help you monitor how well users are acting to phishing emails, right? So that would be the first thing. You don't really want to try to build your own system here. This is where you want to take someone who specializes in certain types of security awareness training, and then just implement the programs. You asked who does this. This would usually come from your information. It would be under the head of your chief security officer, or your chief information officer, or your chief information security officer, whatever the organization uses. And that usually is going to fall within the realm of IT and security, InfoSec operations, for example. It's not a one-time thing. It's a continuous improvement type process where you're constantly, you don't want to overload your users because, that can just make people just angry. But, this periodic, say, for example, a quarterly set of 30-minute training videos, that's say, for example, I can't think of who does that, but in fact, I've got to do one training today. It's actually we have to do at Tripwire. We actually have to do quarterly trainings for compliance reasons. So some companies have to do this nowadays because of compliance. But yeah, the having the IT / security operations team take ownership of the security awareness training process, and then finding a vendor that you trust or want to use to help you with that training, and do it periodically, not too much, but enough so that people can not stay on understand to stay on top of things.
So once in 2-3 weeks, probably this is a good.
Well, the phishing simulation could be once or twice, 1 to 4 times a month. It's no big deal when you get a phishing email. And we have there's integrations where you don't even all you have to do is click a button in your Microsoft Outlook or whatever your email you're using. But with Microsoft Outlook, for example, this certain companies, they provide a little button, and you can say, report this as a phishing email. And if it's a simulated one, then it'll come back and say, hey, good job. This was a simulated email. And if it's a real phishing email, then it goes to the security department so that they can evaluate it and see, do whatever they do in terms of.
Yeah, we actually had this gamification simulation, right? There were actually rewards for people who spotted the most of the fishes, right? So effectively, it was pretty cool. It was actually fun, and people it was not anger. So it was actually, you were looking at this email and you were even trying to spot the things that were for instance, we have received emails from them, McKinsey, for instance, with the only 2 letters changed, but this was actually where I have experience, and it so for if there are any McKinsey clients listening to us, they really do a lot of this stuff well. So I'm not trying to advertise or anything, but this is actually I can as an ex-employee I can recommend this. Okay, but kind of coming back to the industrial organizations, from my experience, they are not the most advanced generally digitally, and they are not the most sophisticated organizations when it comes to the IT, OT, production, management. Definitely they are one of the best, obviously, but when it comes to the AT, how can assuming that we have certain budgetary discussions in our organizations, and obviously the CSO guy is someone that in some organization this person tends to be the most, let's call it, annoying, in a sense that is always the most kind of doomsaying things, and generally this is the vibe that I see here. And actually I've read about it a few times when I was preparing for this. And so how can we empower the CSO person that also we don't probably have that much of the budget? We also have these regulatory issues like GDPR in Europe, and this person takes a lot of their time is about GDPR issues.
Yeah.
So how can we empower the CSO to not be the one guy with the segregator of and documents and compliance and regulatory risks, but rather a person that helps within the development process?
Yeah, that's a good question. You kind of mentioned it, kind of hit the nail on the head, so to speak. Is that the security guys have always been the annoying ones, right? But unfortunately, it's something we have to live with now. And so you want to start seeing, it's not, so security issues shouldn't be something that's just on the CSO. It should be something that's visible and obviously not. It should be visible across the entire C-suite of a company. For example, it should be that everyone should understand the needs that must be fulfilled. The annoying part, getting the bad the bad taste, or the bad okay, the CSO's coming, just let me walk the other way. That is unfortunately just how security kind of evolved and made its way up into the C-suite, where you had guys that they weren't really business folks, right? But the need of having a chief, or a CISO, I guess is what I'm really thinking about here, Chief Information Security Officer. They're now becoming a little bit more executive than in the early days. But what I'm trying to get to is, a lot of the bad aspects of security came from, you just can't go, everyone was trying to lock users down to where they couldn't do anything, and thinking that was a way of, okay, that's the only way we can do security. And that's not necessarily true either. You've got to find a way to have a balance of, making sure you're secure, but also making sure that your systems and your environments and your employees have usability aspects. There's always this trade-off between security and usability. So empowering them is really just making sure, in my opinion, it's not the best answer, but communicating up and down and across, instead of working in isolation, and making, bringing other folks into the discussion on a daily basis, I think helps in part of this situation you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. So one thing is like CSO aspect, and second is like communicating the importance. So again, awareness.
Yes, communication is very, very important. Yep.
So again, awareness. Okay. I'm actually thinking on this perspective. Like, we have covered phishing, we have covered the ransomware, the awareness aspects, because they're like the operation. So okay, so let's assume that we have this breach, like, and we have this breach, our like employees' data, and we have like 4,000 employees in the facility. They are like, in the somewhere in the darknet server. So pretty much everyone can take a loan on them right now. So let's assume such thing happens, right, in the facility, in the manufacturing facility especially. So what are the next steps?
Being open and letting everyone who's involved know about it as soon as possible. So communicating the breach to the appropriate stakeholders, whether it's your employees, your third party, or your strategic partners that might be impacted. Sometimes you might need to go to press, for example, depending on the size of the company or how you're involved, and actually communicated at very large scale. But communicating the breach as early and as soon as possible is, one of the first things. Second thing is trying to find the source of the breach, obviously, so that you can, do a root cause analysis, find out what happened, fix it, and everything, as well as then providing. And this is where I don't know how this works, worldwide. But like in the US, for example, when this happens, most companies will offer everyone that's involved in the said breach some type of identity protection or identity monitoring services, so that folks can monitor their credit reports to see if, for example, if someone obtained their personal information and, say, applied for credit or a credit card, or started using that to set up accounts, then appropriate credit monitoring or identity monitoring services is kind of key in helping those that are impacted to at least keep an eye on, if on their personal information.
So again, I see that awareness and transparency when something like that happens is critical. So, and everyone knows, every expert says you need to be transparent about the breach. And this is what the CD Projekt that I mentioned did. They were super transparent about it. Yes, that's all great. But so why the companies like don't do it, like because they try to hide it under basically under the carpet and try to hide it, not mention it. They're thinking they can do it on their own, and every time when such situation happens, they don't manage to hide it. These things blow up, and the crisis is even harder. So what is the push in the companies, like also psychologically speaking, to not go into the to not follow the protocols and the best in class examples?
For one, they might totally have no one in the organization that understands the severity and understands the whys and why nots of how this happened or what they should do. Totally unprepared for a situation like this, thinking some let's go back to the CISO a little bit. Some of the, at one time it was people would, you would say, CISO, he'll be here for 6 months and then he's gone or she's gone. The problem is that at one time there was this idea of, if you get breached, you're going to be fired. You cannot have a security breach. Well, that is the wrong way of viewing security. You have to ask the question, what do I do when I'm breached? That's the question we have to ask ourselves nowadays, not saying I'm going to make sure that I can't be breached, because that's impossible. So anyway, going back to the original question, it could be that they've just got this weird mindset that they can't be breached, and if they did, they just want to keep it quiet because of they don't want to be shamed. For example, the company doesn't want to look bad, and they think they can, like you just said, they think they can keep it quiet, but once it comes out, that it's over. Then it's even going to be worse because they hit it in certain organizations. You can be, it could be fines and things of that nature. But so either you don't have the appropriate staffing and expertise in your company to know how to act on it, would be one thing, and then the other thing is you're just totally trying to hide it, just to like I said, just to you think you're not going to you don't want your customers and your partners and stuff to know about it, and that just turns out to bite you in the end.
Yeah, but actually this is super easy. Like, we were breached, like we were hacked. So this is like, actually you can very easily, the narrative is not your fault to some extent, right? Like, obviously right. It's your fault because you were breached, you didn't have the right security protocol, etc. But if you're fallen prey of like some bad hackers, I think that public opinion actually resonates with the victim and supports the victim rather than the so I'm actually, this is why I was before we had this webinar, I was actually curious about this issue. So before we jump into questions, one last thing. So is cybersecurity in general expensive for the company? Expensive? Yeah.
It can be. Unfortunately, it can be very expensive because it requires, special technologies. If you're a small organization, you can use free tools, right? Open source tools are out there. You can build your own homegrown internal security processes, and you could do that relatively inexpensive. But when you start looking at larger organizations, you're going to spend a lot of money. And unfortunately, there's no way around it because, it requires, certain types of expertise to build the products, and then a certain type of expertise to use the products, and then the products themselves. And so, yes, it's, I can't give a number because it really depends on what you're doing. But yes, it can be very expensive, unfortunately.
But is there a threshold between small and big organization and you should really care about the cybersecurity? Because very often there is this certain inflection point in the function where it starts to be important while previously it was not. So for instance, this is the case of, HR department in the organizations above 50 people, right? This is where you need to have an HR, right? But I'm just wondering if this is the same with the cybersecurity.
I'm not sure. Like you said, if you've got 10 to 50 people, then you could probably get by with some, a lot cheaper, especially if you still have to have someone that can do it, And having one person to do it nowadays, it might not be enough. So you still have to have some staffing that can even do it. But once you start getting into the hundreds, if just to give you I would say once you start getting into the hundreds is definitely when you're going to have to start spending a little bit more money. It's a lot harder. You've got more people involved, you've got more moving parts and things of that nature. And it also depends on your business model. Maybe you're in a situation where you can just throw everything away, and like I said earlier, your computer gets hacked. Just blow it away, reinstall your operating system, and just be gone. It really kind of depends on your business model, what you're doing. Could be that basic if you're a small organization, just making sure that you've got a good firewall between your system and the internet, might work for a while.
Okay. So this was super insightful. So I'm just trying to think like when I will actually need to invest heavily into cybersecurity protocols, because obviously there are like all these things like people have the same passwords everywhere, and they have this. I try to use the encryption software for the passwords, but still like it's not obvious. For instance, when you have these cheap software as a service apps which you use for marketing purposes, there is no really the way to actually what I know about cloud is that if you're using such apps, and you're like following different encryption, there is not really a way to breach it in a way that they can breach this account, but the fact that this is not integrated with your actual systems, this is not a problem. For instance, this StreamYard account, right? This is like you can't really do that now here, right?
Right.
So as long as you don't have the same password for more important and vital things,
right.
This is fine. But like with this software, this is different. So maybe the way I see it, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm obviously like the kind of looking from the military perspective, is like that the way I see the cybersecurity is like a fortress naturally. So like kind of the scene from the Lord of the Rings and the Helm's Deep, where they withdraw to the inner levels, but they have like some level of the plan, right? And obviously I don't know if this is actually like that, but like kind of for me it's slightly easier to envision for myself, like
right.
How should I approach it, that they should have a withdrawal and a backup plan, right? And also recently, like my laptop broke, the motherboard fried, and luckily I had a backup. But there are two types of people that don't do backup, that do backup, and that people that don't yet do backup, right? So
right.
this is what I was told. So Lane, let's answer some questions we have from the audience. Okay, so Monica asks, what do you think about air gap backup regarding ransomware prevention?
So if you can ensure an air gap, then the air gaps are good for these types of environments. But you can't, what I caution is, placing, what's the right way to say this, it's getting harder as the days go by to ensure that the air gap exists. But air gaps or segmentation, firewalling is definitely key to help ransomware spreading, especially when it's certain types of ransomware. So the example we talked about earlier, I was specifically talking about how a user gets manipulated and socially engineered to install the software, the ransomware, or the piece of software that will then install the ransomware. But sometimes these ransomware can be what we call wormable, or they can spread on their own. And that is usually a function. It can be a function of an end user that's installed it. And once it installs, it can scan the network that device is connected to look for other systems and try to get it installed. And that usually requires the ransomware to be targeting a known vulnerability. For example, it could be a Microsoft vulnerability that can be exploited over one of its communication protocols. And if the systems haven't been patched, then that ransomware can spread to other systems and replicate itself. And that's where an air gap or network segmentation can really help, is because if you have systems that are behind, you have firewalls, between different systems, And if those firewalls are configured to only allow certain types of special traffic through, then you can actually prevent ransomware spread.
Could you actually
So,
provide a little bit more context for people who don't know what the air gap backup is?
So air gap basically means that you have systems that can't be reached over your local network. So in the old days of what we would call an air gap, especially for like, it's often used air gap. The terminology air gap is usually referred to of all of our industrial type systems, where these systems really, they were air gapped in the sense that they did not live or have any type of interconnectivity to the IT network at all. They had their own special protocols. They were totally air gapped from that perspective. You might have had the computers sitting in the same facility, but you actually literally had to go to the computer in person to actually access it because there was no, it was air gapped and they had no network connectivity. When we talk about firewalls and network segmentation, partitioning, putting, segmentation, meaning that, okay, you've got a group of computers that do a certain job and you can put them in a certain network so that they can only communicate with one another. And a firewall can allow certain types of network traffic in and out. And that's defined by what are called access control lists.
Okay, thank you for this context, because for people who don't know, that might be actually super useful. And another question is, how can we protect ourselves from the hackers like SolarWinds?
That's
Who the SolarWinds are?
It's a very hard. So supply chain issues is one of the biggest challenges, one of the major challenges we can face, because in the case of something like SolarWinds, we rely on the vendor to say, hey, we've got a breach, or we've got, in their case, I believe what it was, I don't remember the exact details of SolarWinds. I didn't study it in depth, but they essentially were able to ship software or something inside of trusted software. So the supply chain problems, it's extremely hard to protect yourself. I'm just not going to lie. There are no straightforward solutions other than hopefully you're working with a vendor that you can trust. And once the vendor understands that there's a problem, they're going to immediately communicate it to their customers, and then you can act on it.
Sure thing. Another question we have just received: any software recommendations for IoT security tools that DevSecOps engineers could include into CI/CD? So this is CI/CD as a continuous integration, continuous development.
Right.
Yep.
Interesting. IoT security tools. IoT and security are like two words you never use in the same sentence, unfortunately. Most IoT security, there are some IoT security products that are companies that are coming online. I don't have any that I can think of at the time, but I could reply when you post this. I could actually go back and look at some of the newer tools that are coming online that you could actually integrate into the CI/CD. I think that's kind of a new area right now. I mean, even unfortunately integrating non-IoT security tools into your CI/CD pipeline is something that's very new. So, I'm sure that will happen at some point in the future. But without some kind of a homegrown solution, I'm not really sure what might exist on the market right now.
Thank you. Okay, so another. Should wannabe industrial/IoT security specialists learn industrial automation tools, PLC operations, etc.?
I would say yes. You can't really be a security specialist in that space without understanding the technology. So it's definitely something you would want to learn. At least from a high level, you need to understand all that. You don't need to, speak the so-called protocol. You don't have to go learn Modbus and understand it bit by bit or anything like that. But you need to understand what Modbus is or what DNP is, and you need to understand the technology itself.
Yeah, like you can't
Unfortunately,
protect it if you
it's
don't know it.
exactly. Unfortunately, it's hard to get hands-on training with some of those things without being on the job. So it's kind of it's a little bit harder to enter that space from scratch. Um, that would be the only thing that I would say is kind of a little bit of a challenge. But you definitely have to know it. And in really nowadays, especially where we're going with the industrial, industry 4.0, for example. Right now we have the OT experts, the operational technology experts. They're focusing on the industrial security. IoT or industrial IoT, industrial Internet of Things. Those are kind of a mix between industrial technology and IT technology, or OT and IT, because you might have, for example, what the industrial Internet of Things is essentially like having a PLC that has a Wi-Fi connection that can connect to your IP network, right? So that's kind of what industrial IoT is. It's just adding internet communication capabilities to all of the things that we have everywhere. So that takes a mixture of both OT and
Sure.
IT on knowledge.
So, Lane, I think we don't have any more questions. Maybe we'll give our audience a little bit more of the time. But could you leave? I will just have two favors to ask. Could you maybe give us a glimpse and a little bit of the sneak peek of what you're going to talk about during your weekend course, during our Industry 4.0 postgraduate program? Because Lane is actually leading our cybersecurity section. So our students will have the whole weekend with him. But could you just maybe give a little bit of the agenda of what you're going to talk about, and why it is actually important?
Sure. So it's 2 days. It's a Saturday and Sunday, if I believe, is what the schedule is. And the first day is going to be based on, we're going to be learning about cybersecurity for Industry 4.0, for industrial systems. And how the material is coming together is, it's not going to go too technical, because we're targeting folks that might be more executive, more managerial, and things of that nature. So we're not going to be going in and learning how to write code, for example. We might have a few case studies where we kind of look at certain things, but the idea is to give more of a holistic view. You can't start talking about cybersecurity for industry until you understand the basics of security in itself. So we're going to start off just covering the basics of what is cybersecurity, why does it exist, what do we have to do in general to work with this problem, like, for example, understanding what it means to have layered defense, as I mentioned earlier. And then we're going to start moving our way into the more into the challenges that we're going to face in terms of Industry 4.0. We're going to be talking about things that I mentioned earlier: IT, OT integration, the challenges that we face there, both from the human and technology side. And then, let's see, we are going to talk about software supply chain issues. I want to talk a little bit about that, just at least from so the student can, or the learner can, walk away and understand that supply chain issues or digital supply chain issues are an issue that we have to address. And we're going to talk about architectures and frameworks, standards, and hopefully get into some advanced concepts and discussing future trends of where we might be going in the future.
Awesome.
On the second day, we're going to be talking about risk management and managing technology risk in Industry 4.0. I'm just looking at my notes. And similar, we're going to start off with an overview and an introduction of what it means. Risk and cybersecurity are very much connected, but they're not always the same. And so I'm going to try to illustrate how the differences and how they interconnect with one another. Understanding how to address risk holistically via the people, processes, and technology. You can't address risk without the entire, and bringing processes and people and technology together. When it comes to risk, there's a lot of issues you have to understand in different domains. So we're going to talk about standards and compliance across the various industrial sectors that you might be involved with. And we're going to talk a little bit about maturity models. If you want to reduce risk in your organization, then it's not something that's going to happen overnight, but in the long term, you want to see your organization mature. So we'll talk about maturity models, and that can help one gauge their progress of trying to maintain continuous improvement in terms of security and risk. And then I think we're going to finish up talking about issues like secure by design concepts, just to throw that out there. And then we're going to talk about business continuity, disaster recovery, and incident response.
Awesome. And do you have a plan for the? I understand that you also have a plan for the workshops, etc., for them.
Yes.
Okay, so this will be a workshop and discussion with the team, within the group.
Yeah. I try to keep open discussion. Yep.
Yeah, amazing. So our students love interaction, and this is what we do at Stanversity. Like, we bring the best knowledge of the best experts in the world, and this is like I think you have you just received like just an hour of Lane's knowledge. So imagine what he can deliver in the whole weekend, and even more. So Lane, I would like to thank you for this over 1 hour. I know that this is still your normal work day, so I won't be taking any more of your time. Super grateful that you have found the time for that. I hope that you also liked it. So thank you for this amazing conversation.
Thanks for inviting me. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Take care and see you on our classes.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.